No, I'm just talking. Okay. I can't quite tell. Is the audio on for me? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for turning up. I was kind of worried that, given that it's only noon and that I'm opposite Null Sleep's thing on the chiptune scene, I'm actually quite pleasantly surprised that a number of you have turned up. My name is Michael McFarland. You can call me Ned, just to be confusing. It's from my middle name. I, as per the title of this talk, am not a geek. More apropos to the conference, I'm not a hacker. But not a geek sounded like a better title. I've come here to sort of present the view of the technological world, or problems of the split between geeks and non-geeks from the point of view of the non-geek. It's one of the things with the themes of Notacon, with tech and art, creativity, forming communities around that. There's a lot of things that are covered. There's the art tech scene, particularly with the Block Party. There's a lot of talk about hacker spaces. Hacker Foundation is doing quite a lot in terms of building the hacker community. And there's also a lot of talk about the creative economy. That's going to be the keynote speech. And also at the introduction about the Ingenuity Festival. This idea of promoting sort of the art tech economy as a way forward. Is there something?
This isn't working. Uh-oh. Check.
Yeah, are you getting good audio now?
Yeah, a little better, but keep talking.
Okay. Anyway, while I support and quite enjoy coming to this type of a conference where sort of the hacker end of creating these sort of spaces is being built, there are a lot of us non-geeks out there, people who don't understand technology. And not all of us are complete idiots. Many of us are quite intelligent. It's just not our scene. And so my question is, how do people with different interests, who aren't part of this scene or the art side of it, how can we work together to form a culture and a broader community where we support the type of work that you do? Because the larger the gap between the people who know what the hell's going on with the technology and the people that don't, the more problems are going to arise, both with in the public policy sphere, like the laws that are implemented by people who don't actually understand the technology, but also with just getting you guys the respect you deserve for the complexity of the work that you know how to do. Because if people don't know what it is that you do, they're not going to care, and thus you're not going to get people going into the art tech scene and forming the creative economy. So I started thinking about this when I was reading, it was originally a lecture by C.P. Snow. He wrote it back in 1959. It's called The Two Cultures. He was in Oxford, I believe it was, or Cambridge, Don. He wrote this book that in the mid-20th century he was saying that there were really two cultures developing. There was the humanities side of academia, and there was the scientific side. And he was both. He was a trained scientist, but he was also a novelist. So he would be at academic parties with the literature types and the humanities types, and he would hear them scoff about, I was talking to the scientist the other day, and he hadn't heard about the latest thing that was in the theater, and they would roll their eyes and laugh at how uneducated this person might be. So he chimed up and asked, "Can you describe to me the second law of thermodynamics?" And they would just sort of stare at him blankly. And he says, "Yet I was asking them something which is the scientific equivalent of, have you read a work of Shakespeare's? It's basic knowledge." And he goes on to think that even if he had asked about mass and acceleration, which would have been the scientific equivalent of saying, "Can you read?" a lot of these, non-sci people would have gone, "Huh, what?" Mass, it just sort of sits there. And they wouldn't have had any idea what he was talking about. And that was 1959. Thermodynamics was his sort of key example of whether or not people knew what they were talking about. Now, you have the capacity to hold worldwide communication in your hand. I can take my cell phone out and call friends of mine over in England. ENIAC used to fill a room. We have computers now that do that, probably fit in the palm of your hand, certainly can sit on your lap. I mean, the technology has advanced far beyond what he was talking about, and yet I think the gap is greater because people have cell phones, people have laptops. The technology is no longer confined to the laboratory or to, it used to be that everybody's endpoint of the telephone system was their telephone, and most of the technology was in a building somewhere. Now they're holding it, they're carrying it around with them. It's much more in people's daily lives. Oh, there we go. And yet, a lot of people don't really know how it works. And Snow thought there were two main problems that I alluded to in the introduction that stemmed from this. One is that people make bad decisions if they don't know what's going on, and also that there's a lack of respect among people who don't know the technology for those that do, because they don't understand the complexity of it. Just an example, specifically of the problems when the non-geek doesn't know what the hell's going on. And this, I'm sure many of you will laugh at me because it's a really simple problem. But back in 2001, I bought a new laptop, Windows XP. I had been using PGP pretty rarely at the time, but I thought I'd install it. No one told me that, at least with my configuration, PGP and Windows XP were fatally incompatible. It froze my keyboard, and I could not do anything with my computer. I tried what I could, which was essentially searching Google and saying, what the hell's going on? And buried deep in the Microsoft knowledge base was some sort of reference to this. But I tried the few things that I knew how to do, and that was the end of that. Fortunately, some IT friends of mine who knew what the hell to do were able to, partition the drive, install another operating system in the partition. I could log into that, rescue my files before wiping the whole thing and starting again. It's, I understand that it's a relatively simple solution if you know what to do, which I didn't. But more seriously, when you get into the public policy, it's, when I have a problem, I go to somebody who knows how to fix it and they fix it. When communities have a problem that they don't quite understand, they start to make bad decisions based on they're not quite knowing exactly how the thing works. And I actually saw this a lot yesterday with Jason Scott's talk about Wikipedia, that and people can abuse the system, but if you don't fully recognize how they're abusing the system, if you don't see what they're doing, you'll try a technical fix that isn't actually going to work. The example that I thought of was when parents, in particular, are afraid of children getting a hold of pornography in the school, on the school computer and the library computer, they start flipping out and they put really restrictive content blockers on the sites, which also block useful information about sexual education, about medical issues, because they don't understand that a blanket thing like that isn't going to work the way the internet is set up. It just doesn't operate that way. So they're avoiding the human solution, which is to work with your children, understand what they're looking at, and sometimes if something slips through, yes, that is the danger of the internet, work with it, rather than try and slap a fix on from the top. And then if you scale that up a level with network neutrality, with the broadcast flag idea, a lot of the people who are making these laws that affect how the internet and how technology is used and will develop in the coming decades, they don't understand actually how it works. They just have heard horror stories about what happens. Oh, all this horrible stuff is available. We must restrict it. We must put these laws in effect. And a lot of that is based on not knowing and not understanding the benefits that come from things being designed the way that they are. But also, as I said, Snow pointed out that if people don't understand technology, they don't understand or they don't respect people that do. And this also has public policy implications. I was looking at the idea of the Cisco Certified Internetwork Expert Program. most people, particularly outside of the IT field, don't know what that means. But it's a harder certification to achieve than law school. It's more difficult to pass than the bar. And you have to pass it more frequently than you have to sit your medical boards if you're a doctor. The pass rate is less than for the bar, and you have to do it every 2 years as opposed to every 7 or 5, depending on what kind of doctor you are. And yet people recognize doctor, lawyer. Oh, wow, you're such a great person. You've studied all this sort of stuff. But they don't understand the CCIE, so they end up not respecting the people that do. Now, that's one thing if you're in this country where we have plenty of people with that or an equivalent certification from another system. But if you're concerned about the issue of the digital divide, particularly in the developing world, that the more technologically advanced we become in the West, the farther behind people lag in countries where they don't have Wi-Fi hotspots, where they don't have even the cables running out into the rural areas to bring the internet to people. I was looking at these stats. There are 8 CCIE certified people in Nigeria in a population of 140 million. That's 1 per 17.5 million people. That's all that there is in Nigeria that at least have the Cisco certification. I presume that the sort of the technical expertise in other certifications is equally dismal. In the US, we have 260 times that many people. So if you're concerned about the digital divide, if you're concerned about bringing the benefits of technology to people around the world, you have to be concerned that nobody respects the CCIE designation enough to push it as a thing that people should get. There are plenty of doctors, there are plenty of lawyers in Nigeria, and they need those too, but that's because students from there come over here and we're like, oh yes, you should study this, you should study this. They come over here and we don't know that the tech knowledge is equally important, and so you don't promote it. It's an under-respected field, and so you get people, there's a lack of education, which particularly affects a situation like a developing country. So I've sort of touched on the problems that can arise when not enough people know about tech. My question is what to do about it. And I've seen certainly from the hacker side of the equation a couple of different answers that have come forward. The first is what I call the idea of the prime directive solution. If people don't understand technology, you better not give it to them because they're going to hurt themselves. And that's usually the nice way that it's put. I have plenty of hacker friends, and I mentioned this concept that, what do you think about non-hackers? And, the language becomes somewhat unmoderated. I can see where you're coming from in that there are dumb people out there, and they ask really dumb questions, and it's hard not to laugh at somebody who just does not get something that you picked up pretty quickly, which is a basic thing. But I counter that with the example of my fiance. My fiance, Lisa, is a pediatric gastroenterologist. She is a subspecialist doctor, and she does really good work. She fixes your children, or if you are under 18, she fixes you. She does not understand anything about computers, less than even me, and I have a cursory knowledge at best. But she at least respects the people who do. So if she has a problem at her computer at work, she calls up the clinic IT team. They come down and they fix it. And if they have a child who has a stomach illness, she knows how to fix that. It's a system of mutual respect and working together, even though the actual fields of knowledge are separate. Each values what the other can do. And if you take sort of the negative approach to the non-geek, you risk alienating us. If my fiance doesn't treat people, they don't get better. So she has no computer because it's broken because nobody's helping her, and people are going sick because she's not helping them. Obviously, I think this is not a working model. What's needed is mutual respect. If the problem one of the problems is lack of respect. You got to build it rather than just say, oh, these people are idiots. Another thing that I've seen is what I call the edge model from the edge.org. Back in 59, 60, when Snow wrote about the two cultures, he started thinking about what he called the third culture, which is essentially people who can bridge that gap. And this is something John Brockman at the Edge Foundation, he really has taken on this mantle and run with it. And he says that the third culture consists of scientists and other thinkers in the empirical world who, through their work and expository writing, are taking the place of the traditional intellectual and rendering visible the deeper meanings of our lives, redefining who and what we are. Which is, it's quite an interesting site. I mean, there are some smart people on there. And they do try to, as scientists, predominantly scientists, bridge this gap between the two cultures by explaining in non-scientific terms what is going on. And what the things that they are discovering about psychology, neuroscience, about physics, what that says about the human experience. And there's quite a lot to be learned from that, but at the same time, the EDGE mission is to arrive at the edge of the world's knowledge, seek out the most complex and sophisticated minds, put them in a room together, and have them ask the questions they are asking themselves. It's a really good idea, but I am not one of the world's most complex and sophisticated minds. I'm kind of average. So the EDGE model of trying to bridge the gap from the top, take the smartest scientist you can find and talk to people. They're going to reach the smartest non-scientist types, but they're probably not going to really bridge the gap in terms of creating a culture, a society at large, where science and technology are respected. If anything, they might further the sort of the divide between the educated in general and the people who don't have high-level degrees like I do. It's a start, but it doesn't provide the understanding of technology, which is the other aspect of the two cultures, or the other problem of the two cultures divide. So the third thing that I've seen is what I call the Mozilla model. Blake Ross was at the City Club here in Cleveland last year. He was talking about how when he and Dave Hyatt developed Mozilla, what they did is, Mozilla Firefox, what they did is they actually sat down with people. They went to local coffee shops and bookstores and whatnot and sat down at free tables with a sign that said, "Sit down if you hate computers." Because they found out that the people who they'd been working with, in Netscape and whatever, at these usability labs, would have this completely non-realistic environment where they would sit somebody down at a computer and say, oh, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And see how the user interacted with the machine in ways that were not related to how people every day use their machines. Ross said he was quite surprised. A lot of those, at least those so-called experts, would be quite surprised how the normal person uses their computer, particularly when it's not doing what they want it to. It's certainly not what you're going to find in a usability workshop. So he sat down with people. He, instead of deciding what needed to be fixed, then testing it in usability lab to see if he had done it, he went to people and said, what don't you like about surfing? And they said, I hate pop-ups. And he said, oh, wait, we can do something about that. And they said, I just want it to be simple. I don't want all these things that Internet Explorer has. And he said, oh, we can do that. So this, I think, working with people at the low level on what people want and what they're doing with the technology that's in their hands, even if they don't understand it, they can explain to you what they're not getting from it and what they want from it, and you can work with them. And this, I think, builds sort of both the respect and the understanding, in that you're working with people who are smart enough to tell you what's going on, and they can appreciate that you're fixing it, but they don't have to learn the details themselves. They can if they want to, but it's not a requirement. So from the non-geek point of view, which is mine, and speaking to a group of hackers, I have to say that the two things that I think you should do are One is tell your story better. Explain what it is you do and why it's important in a better way, because I don't think people understand. And I think a lot of this has to do with the way that the story is told. Chip and Dan Heath were a couple authors, recently wrote a book called Made to Stick, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. And they looked at why it is that urban legends, concepts, advertising campaigns, that sort of thing, stick in the mind and why others don't. And they said that what you need to do is tell simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional stories. And if you were to write that down, you would notice that the acronym for that is SUCCESS, without the S. Yes, it's cheesy, but simple acronyms like that are that sort of thing. They help people remember, even if you might roll your eyes a bit at the word itself. And when talking about technology, I think you guys run into an automatic problem with there's a tension between simplicity and concreteness, because to explain technology simply, quite quickly, it's going to be abstract. The concept of email is an abstraction. It's not much like mail, but people understand, oh, email, I write something and I send it and somebody else gets it. But if you actually try and explain packet switching and the details to it, you're concrete. You're telling them actually how it works, but it's no longer simple. They're not going to follow you. Another talk I was listening to at the City Club last year was Vint Cerf came in and described his thinking when he was developing packet switching at DARPA. And he was trying to explain it in terms of, think of email as sending mail. You're sending information, but you're dividing it up as though it were postcards. And you're sending them in different ways so that if one mail route gets blocked, they can be rerouted. But then, because they're being sent differently, you have to number them. And if you number them, then sometimes they get out of order, so you have to have a system which puts them back in order. And then if they get caught up at one route, you have to have a buffering system. And suddenly his relatively simple analogy of sending a letter, or sending an email and sending a letter, it suddenly loses ground because you're bringing in all of these analogies and metaphors that aren't quite working. And frankly, on this one, I don't have an answer for you guys. I don't think there's a way to explain technology simply, but also concretely. Either you're going to explain it simply and it's going to be abstract and people are just going to have to deal with that, or you can try and explain to people concretely what is actually going on, and they're going to have to accept that it's not simple. What I think is the issue is some of the other aspects of Chip and Dan's Heath idea is credibility and the emotional value. People value things for emotional reasons, not for technical reasons. People value email because it allows them to communicate quite quickly with people around the world. If they go off to college or whatever, they can send back and forth to your parents. If you go, you can, if you find something that you like online, you can quickly email the author of it. People value that on an emotional level, and it's credible. They do it, they see it, and they say, oh, this gets done, and it's important to me, so they end up valuing the people who can provide them that service. So if you are, if you're working in the IT field, and you're the network manager at a place, and people ask you, oh, what do you do? You can try and bridge this thing of simplicity and complexity because it's a complex job, and you might not have time in elevator ride to explain what the hell you're doing. But if you are credible, if you say, oh, I keep the network running, all that stuff that you do, I'm the one who keeps the wires connected, they're going to get that because it's credible and also because they're invested in it. You're telling them that you help them do what they're doing. And I think it's that way that, you're going to have trouble with that simplicity complexity thing, but if you tell them the truth, the credible, this is what I do, and this is why it's important because you use it all the time, I think people are going to say, hey, I like you, please continue, I'll pay you a lot of money. But one of the problems is there's only so far you can go even with the most simplest and abstract explanation. If people don't understand what it is you're doing, if they just think that the computer is a magical tool that they log into, and it somehow works, and they don't understand even the basics, no matter how much you try and convince them, oh yeah, back in this other room here, I'm doing something, they might think you're doing a voodoo dance, or they have no idea. You have to work. You have to tell people who understand what the hell that you're talking about what you do. And here, I think, is where the hacker community has to get involved in the community at large. Essentially, you have to get political. And political, I don't mean partisan. I don't mean supporting this candidate or that candidate and getting into the muck that really makes civic life, particularly in this country with all of our combativeness between the two-party system. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about political in the traditional sense of looking at society, looking at what you think should be done, and working on it. There are a lot of advocacy groups that do some politics, but they also just advocate for general understanding. The Hacker Foundation, Electronic Frontier Foundation, Internet Society, there are a lot of groups that do these sort of things. And they want you. They are coming, Hacker Foundation, in fact, came to this particular con to say, join us. Because they help develop the hacker community, but they also connect, they look at what's going on in the wider world and promote the hacker view outside. And there's a lot of things that they're doing, looking at the way that laws are implemented, but the thing that I think is most important is education. Hackers should promote educational initiatives where they can. And by this I mean technical education is quite important. Getting good tech standards so that people know what's going on the technological side of things, and they understand, when you hand them some new tech, they can start using it, and there's not a lot of hiccup with new users trying to figure stuff out. And also, I was listening to Kelly Keegan's talk yesterday about trying to bring the internet the way students actually use it into the classroom, as opposed to sitting them down in rows and teaching them in traditional ways that aren't related to how people interact, particularly on the internet anymore. And that's an important sort of thing to think about, is look at how education works in your local school board. But I'm also talking about education generally. Because like I said, I'm not a hacker. I appreciate the sort of stuff you do, and I've used technology for quite a while, because my dad is a research chemist. We've had a computer since the early 80s. It was an Olivetti M20, actually, was our first one. So even before PCs were the norm. But it's, I didn't get into it. I almost kind of wish I had. My early introduction, I could have, made $1 gazillion in the dot-com boom and still been poor now, because I would have lost it all, I'm sure. But I didn't go that route. I am interested in different stuff. I'm the sociology type. That's what I like. But my education was good. And having a good education makes me think about stuff, which makes me understand. If you give me a basic explanation of what the hell it is that you're doing, I'll go, oh, I see. I might not know the details, but I'll get the gist of it. And I'll see where you're coming from, and I'll respect what you do. And I'll say, oh, yes, what they do is important, and we should, we should support them. So, yes, get behind the technical, initiatives for education, and get behind the particularly from the Cleveland area, the whole ingenuity, creative economy sort of thing, but also get behind education generally. Support, look at how much people are or are not learning in our culture and in our society, and say, ask yourselves what you can do about it. So those are my two real points. Find a good way to tell people what you do and why it's important, and promote the sort of culture. Get involved in society at large so that the person that you're talking to understands you and can meet you halfway. Even if they're not from the scene, even if they don't get the details of it, they're at least, well-educated enough that they grasp the gist of it and can work with you. So in the end, I just say, it's good to build hackerspaces, but I also appreciate Notacon as a place where I can come as a non-geek, hold forth on this sort of thing, and try and bridge that gap. So I'll leave it at that. And are there any questions? If there are, if there's a microphone up here you can use. Do you want to come up, or you can just shout it out?
I think I can follow.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
One of the responses, especially in the last 10 years, to the increase of technology seems to be giving up, retreating to simple and maybe older truths.
Yeah.
And rejecting technology and actually saying that it's dangerous and perhaps evil.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
That was actually something that I did think about in writing this. That was one of the other aspects of what I called sort of the prime directive response. I study conflict. It's my postgraduate work, and religious conflict in particular. So I was looking at the modern terrorism. You'll have people who oppose modern society, high level of education, that sort of thing. People who have the technical smarts. Terrorists are not dumb people to pull off some of the stuff they do, but they do not, I think, value the broad-based education that I was talking about. So if you were to go to Afghanistan, they were just cutting the legs right out from under themselves because they were destroying the foundations of an educated society that it takes to have people who could fight the battles that they were wanting to fight. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing, and that was where I first thought of the whole prime directive idea that, maybe these people shouldn't have that sort of technology. They're using cell phones and whatnot that their own worldview would not allow to be created, and they're using this technology to harm people. And apart from it doesn't work unless you're in Star Trek, where you can just observe a planet from a distance and say, oh, they don't have warp technology, we're not going to go down there. We're all intermixed in the world. People are going to get technology somehow, so there's no way of denying it to people. So I think the answer is, I think it does go back to what I was saying, is telling your story is that, yeah, the more complex technology gets, even though it's in your hand, even though you can have a laptop sitting right there that has a lot of computing power compared to what we've had through the vast history of humanity, it's getting so complex that people are beginning to just not want to understand it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the story isn't being told well. And I mean not the story of the history of how it was created, but the emotive story, the kernel truth that underlies a society's self-knowledge, why technology is important. So it's part to do with telling the story, but also I think part to do with general education. That's where you have to sit down and fight. So this draws in the politics of education. If people oppose scientific knowledge based on their personal or their communal view, not even personal, their communal view of, say, the creation of the world, while the issue isn't specifically about technology, so that, okay, so we overlook evolution, we're not going to talk about it in the classroom. People will still teach the kids how to use computers. You are, taking from these kids knowledge of science generally, which leaves them less able to cope with the technology as it comes. So that's one of a specific point of getting involved and promoting science education, getting behind people who are, saying, yes, we have to teach evolution. Because there are religious people who are for the teaching of evolution. They respect the science. They say, yeah, our view has to do with person's inner and spiritual life, but the evidence is incontrovertible. Even the Pope has come out and said, oh yeah, evolution's scientific fact. I'm the Pope. I talk about other stuff. So, you can even work with religious people. It doesn't have to be this sort of us and them divide between those who know and those who don't. But it does have to be when you see somebody coming in and saying, oh, we shouldn't teach kids that. Anytime somebody says, oh, we shouldn't teach kids that, you got to say, why? If you're not teaching somebody something, you're cutting off an aspect of knowledge, which means that later they're just not going to be as interested in stuff generally. So that was a long-winded kind of roundabout explanation, but hope it answered the question. Are there any other questions, comments people want to make? Yeah.
Okay, first off, I can agree with you on the...
Yeah, is that one on?
Well,
Is this switch on?
yes. All right, I can agree with you on the whole everybody needs education thing.
There you go.
Definitely.
It's a bit
Does it
low.
come up?
All right, but I feel weird. All right, but I already forgot what I was going to talk about. I can agree with the education, but I forgot what I was going to talk about now.
Yeah, all that trouble with the microphone.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember.
What was it like? What did it involve?
It was. I agree with the education thing. Everybody needs education. We can't cut that off. But do you think it could be argued that, or it might not even be argued, but everybody needs this point of view? I'd have to say, and not just the geeks or us nerdy people being flexible to the people who aren't nerdy. And
Oh,
geeky,
well, yeah.
But everybody kind of has to have that flow together.
Yeah.
To
Well,
be
that's what I'm saying about education generally. It's one thing to teach tech education and science education. And so that was like the first half of my thing was telling the hacker story better. But yeah, if people aren't receptive to it, if it's not going to be a two-way street, I'm not going to ask you to do that. Why bother, going out of your way trying to explain stuff to people if they don't want to listen? So that's why I was talking about education just as a general principle. And I mean education outside of, I'm talking about promoting arts education, music, things that just get any kid interested so that they like thinking and they like doing stuff. And so even if they're not in, if even they don't get into science, even vaguely, let alone, the hacker type scene specifically, they still respect what goes on, and they say, "Oh yeah, that's pretty cool." I don't know how to do it, but I respect those that do. If that was your sort of point, that it has to be a two-way street, I definitely agree.
Those doctors need to be able to come to us and
Yeah.
do what we do to them the same way.
Yeah.
Kind of
Well,
explain
yeah.
to me, but don't go into the details.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what Lisa does, my fiance. That she's a pediatrician, so she deals with kids who she can't explain the details of what she's doing. But kids are often quite receptive. She actually likes being a pediatrician because she doesn't like dealing with adults so much. Because with adults, they try and hide what they're doing, and she in her residencies when she was just walking around, I think that it was general practice. She was talking to this woman and asking her the checklist of stuff, and said, "Do you smoke?" And the woman's like, "Oh no, I don't smoke." And she had a pack of cigarettes in her front pocket, and Lisa's like, "Dude, at least try to lie to me, in a better way than that if you're gonna." Kids apparently don't do that thing so much. If you ask them, honestly, tell me, are you taking your medication? It's okay if you're not. I just need to know. They say, no, I'm not. And so there's sort of an inherent respect there that you get from kids. But I think that's one of the things that everyone always asks about education is how do we keep that sort of honesty that kids might have when people grow up? Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But I think it's supporting general education. It's just keeping people interested in life, in stuff, so that, when you end up talking to them, they don't need to know the details, just like you don't need to know the details of your medical treatment, but you are smart enough to figure out vaguely that if somebody, if you're coming in for a broken bone and they're giving you something else, you're like, wait a minute, what the hell's going on here? Similarly, plenty of non-geeks out there aren't going to get the stuff, but they have to at least respect you enough to trust what you're saying and understand the gist of it. Go, oh, I see how this works. So yeah, I agree. Any other comments, questions, that sort of thing? Yeah.
I have a suggestion for how the non-geeks can interact better with geeks, and that's to learn how to ask questions and to stick with problems instead of solutions. I have an example. One time I had a guy, a non-geek, ask me, tell me, I went to the scanner and OCR software so I could scan my passage. And I was this close to actually doing it before I decided to ask the question why you want that. And
Yeah. Just as an aside, that I mostly here I was talking about what geeks can do to talk to non-geeks better, because I'm here. So I was trying to cater to the audience. But you're right. If I were to be talking to a room of the non-tech people, there'd be a lot of stuff like that I'd say, which would be, explain what it is that you want. Admit that you don't understand it, because that's fine. And work with, then you're working with somebody who knows how these things work, and say what you want rather than, oh, here, do this for me. I think that's what Blake Ross did. He actually went out of his way to ask people. But if we could encourage that sort of mentality, that people complain about their email or their whatever all day, but don't do anything about it because they don't think that there's really a solution. They just think that it sucks. Sometimes it takes somebody asking them before they go, oh, wait, I would like it if it did this. And then you go, oh, I can do that for you. Or in fact, if you just go over here, that service is already implemented. If that were, again, I point to education. And that actually gets back to, although I say, oh, it doesn't have to be sci-tech education, it should be sci-tech education. If you teach people how to think, they're going to ask better questions. They're going to be more, issue-focused rather than solution. Oh, instead of do this, they're going to, ask you what they can do. I hope. What
he's describing is an interesting situation, and you too. Because if we take the instance of a doctor, okay, a doctor is supposed to be an authoritarian thinker. The doctor is supposed to know. Therefore, when the doctor would interact with either of you, he'd say, here, I want it fixed, just fix it. He won't allow you to do the detailed fact finder you need to do to actually diagnose what you should do and fix this problem. And it's a problem in this society of a little bit of intellectual arrogance. We have to break down, because actually you guys should be able to go out and do your job on a consultative basis, and you should first of all start out by asking tons and tons of questions. Do a detailed fact finder and just give the whole layout, and then you can make a proper diagnosis, and then you can do a proper treatment. But until you do that, if they just say, okay, you're the tech guy, just fix it, okay, they haven't taken the time to go ahead and actually figure out what their problem is. And they think they're looking for you to do some type of magic. It's not going to work until we have a better community dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about, is about society, working with society generally speaking, is that, you can go out of your way to be an open-minded type person, but there are issues in our culture where people, don't listen to one another. And this gets beyond, education. This gets to, it's an issue that I work in now I work in community work up in Cleveland Heights, and it's an issue that we have about, they have a whole civility project up there about, it's a bunch of people who got together and asked, why is it that, it seems so rude nowadays walking down the street? What can we do about it? And so, I mean, that's another, just getting out into the culture and saying, hey, the way that we're interacting, apart from being unpleasant, is also unhelpful. And frankly, I'm working in the middle of it right now, and I have no idea what the hell to do. So, I mean, there's some questions that I don't have the answer to. And how to promote just on a broad level people being nice to one another and respecting each other and working with somebody rather than telling them what to do? It's a good question. I don't have the answer to that one. Okay, you haven't asked me yet.
I'm just going to comment that I'm a technical trainer in networking and security, and I have a half dozen trainers I manage. And oftentimes, whenever we get the opportunity, we end up with an end user trainer or something in our other division and gets sick. I'll send one of those guys over for a day to teach, intro to Word. And it amazes them to sit down and watch somebody who is just awed by copy and paste. Because we get kind of jaded in what we do, because we're used to dealing with it on our level, and when somebody can't speak to that, immediately it's kind of like, oh, they're part of the unwashed masses. And so I think it's nice sometimes just to keep in mind the sheer awe of, copy and paste, and that, that they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
A doctor that we were doing some consulting work for, that I was fixing something on his machine, and he goes, oh, what's wrong? He goes, well, just you click through that so fast, because the way you do it, he goes, it amazes me. And I say, yeah, but watch me screw up a pair of cataracts. You know, because what I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing is, you know, it's easy kind of to laugh at somebody when you're faced with their lack of knowledge in your field, but you got to take a step back sometimes and remember, oh wait, you know, there's things that I don't know that this guy could probably kick my ass at. It's not to say that there aren't people with just some dumb questions out there, but you know, more often than not, it's not a dumb person with a dumb question. It's a smart person in another field with a question that looks dumb in this field. So, were there any other? You had your hand up again. Did you want to?
You mentioned John Brockman and the
Yeah.
There's actually a couple of great books that his people have come out with.
Mm-hmm.
One called What I Believe But Cannot Prove.
Oh yeah.
And another one called Dangerous Ideas.
Yep.
Where it pretty much talks about, are there ways in which we're getting ahead of ourselves technologically, and are there things that even the brainiest brains think we could introduce this to a society that perhaps not ready for it and destroy a few things?
Yeah.
Do you have any reflections on that? Do you think there's anything that we maybe are coming to that cusp of, and that there should be an ethical component that goes with science that would guide us instead of keep experimenting until it goes terribly wrong?
We came to that cusp, certainly in the development of nuclear weapons. I mean, we've, depending on the tech, but I mean, that was one of the, in fact, I think that was one of the things that promoted or got into the sci-fi literature back from the 50s, is that you see these, you know, these bleak future scenarios that were based on people they walked out of their house one day, picked up the newspaper, and there's this gigantic mushroom cloud, and cities were suddenly able to be destroyed all at once. And even then, scientists, was it the Pugwash group? People, scientists got together and said, we've just developed some incredible stuff. If this gets into the wrong hands, if too many people, and it was almost by the skin of our teeth at a couple times that the USA and the USSR did not go to nuclear war. There were a few points where there's some stories that if you look into the military history of it, what was it, 1987, or 87, or is it 83? There was, the US started a military exercise. They would have these military exercises right by each other's borders, and it would be a saber rattling and stuff. And there was this one guy in a Russian air defense thing who saw on his computer missiles coming at him, and he said, it was like one missile, and he's like, this can't be right. They're not going to launch one missile. They're going to launch a real strike. He actually did not trust his technology and pushed the retaliation button. He said, oh, this ain't right, and averted a nuclear war. A similar thing happened, I think, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, is that, again, it was a Russian. It was a submarine commander, had partial misinformation and said, I'm not doing this. I don't think that's what is happening on the surface, because he was sub-commander underwater. So, I mean, there have been times already where, by sheer luck and, the willingness of commanders, mid-level commanders, to risk their careers, we did not go to nuclear war. And, yeah, the EDGE every year asks its member thinkers, sometimes it's, what is your most dangerous idea? Or what do you know? You know that it's true, but you can't prove it yet. And they write those books out of it. So right now, in terms of dangerous stuff, I think nuclear weapons are there's tons of them are lying around. We think because the Cold War's over that it's not really an issue anymore, but nobody dismantled all of those intercontinental missiles. They're sitting around. What else? That's the one I can think of off the top of my head. But it is an issue and that's where I do say that the EDGE community is really good, because they ask that sort of question of their scientific members. So I'll leave it at that. Did you have another thing? You had your hand up again.
It was back on the doctor example.
Okay.
Because, my father-in-law would sometimes, like Thanksgiving when we go up there, say, my computer's a piece of junk, I can't use it, fix it. And he's a pediatrician. So I asked him, what would happen if a parent brought their kid in and said, this kid's a piece of junk, all it does is cry. And they got him to think, doctors have had a couple thousand years to work out how they do medicine.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a very structured way of going down through the list and say, when did the problem start, what are the symptoms, being better or worse. I think it might be useful
Well, it's 12:55, so we gotta at least end this part of it so the next talks can come through. But keep talking. I'll join you back there.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.